Welcome to the Avalanche Level 2, Module 5. In this module, we will discuss avalanche mitigation techniques. Mitigation is an activity designed to reduce the impact of an avalanche. Note, we specifically did not say avalanche prevention. Avalanche prevention is not possible. What we try to do with mitigation techniques discussed in the following is to reduce the risk of an avalanche and reduce the consequences of those avalanches that do occur. So we will discuss what groups are involved in avalanche mitigation, and more specifically, we will talk about the role you, as Mount Hood Ski Patrol patrollers, are liable to play. In general, when we talk about avalanche mitigation, we talk about two broad categories of mitigation: passive and active. Passive mitigation involves passive structures that are in place, for example, boundary closures, and do not require action by anyone to enable the mitigation. Active mitigation requires activity of some kind to implement the mitigation. Explosives are the most obvious example of this. We will also touch briefly on post-control release. So who needs mitigation? Well, ski resorts, obviously. But any group exposed to avalanche risk with significant consequences will engage in mitigation of some form. Transportation routes, utilities, mining operation, towns and other populated areas all will have some form of ongoing mitigation to reduce avalanche risk. So how do we, as MHSP volunteers, engage in mitigation activities? First of all, note that the answer to this is very resort specific. Different resorts will have different expectation as to the role volunteers will play in mitigation activities. In general, the role of volunteers will be limited to passive mitigation activity, setting up boundary lines and closures, warning signs, and educating the public as to an avalanche danger present. Some of you, with the appropriate training, may get involved in ski cutting or boot packing. Again, this is very resort specific. In any event, we will not get involved in explosives activity. This requires special training and special ATF certification. Let's discuss a little more detail some of the activity you may be asked to support. Since you're all experienced patrollers, many of these items will be familiar. Depending on the resort, you may be asked to set up rope lines to delineate and close off terrain with elevated avalanche risk. You may be asked to set up warning signs, mine gas, or other barriers. When you're doing this, the key consideration is visibility. All barriers and signage should be set up to maximize visibility to skiers and boarders as well before they reach any closed boundary. The other key part of our activity will be educating the public as to potential hazards. We want to be on the hill and visible and engaging with the public as to risks they may encounter. Customers will ask why an area is closed. This is your chance to educate them and be good ambassadors for the resort. Let's shift gears and talk about other mitigation approaches. For any entity, resort, highway department, whatever, the first step to a mitigation plan is to develop an avalanche atlas. The avalanche atlas will identify the areas where there's a history of avalanches. This is a critical point. Any mitigation plan is based on the collective institutional knowledge of the avalanche team gathered over many years on the terrain of interest. The Avalanche Atlas is the written record of this institutional knowledge. For each identified slide path, there will be a documented mitigation plan and documented response plan. Here's an example of one page of the atlas for Mount Rainier. Each path is identified, shown in blue. For each slide path, starting zones and run-out paths are indicated. This is the documentation for a slide path in Stevens Pass from the Washington Department of Transportation. You can see that starting zones are described, run-out elevation, road elevation, and so forth. Look at the summary description at the bottom. That gives you a sense of what their considerations are in the event of any sort of slide. There are other passive techniques that can be used to reduce the likelihood of an avalanche or the consequences should one occur. Many of these involve structures, walls, fencing, and the like, to reduce the chance of an avalanche release. Others are designed to steer the avalanche away from structures if it occurs. These approaches are quite commonly seen in the Rocky Mountains and in Europe. Here are some examples of these. The top image and the image on the lower left are intended to inhibit release in the starting zone. And here we see a protective barrier that's been built to steer a slide away from a building. These are some of the active mitigation techniques commonly employed. The top two, compaction and protective skiing, involving loading a slope to destroy weak layers and stabilizing a slope without triggering a release. The bottom technique, explosives, involves rapidly stressing the slope with a bomb of some kind to trigger a release. Ski cutting and cornice release are designed to trigger small controlled releases of slope before the snow accumulates to a point where a large release occurs. As we mentioned, explosives rapidly stress to the snowpack to trigger a release. Stress waves occur in the snow or in the air depending on where the shot is placed. Air stress waves from explosive charge detonated several feet off the surface tend to be the most effective. Explosives can be delivered by a variety of methods. Hand charges are probably the most common on Mount Hood. Howitzers, avalanchers, tram, Gaz-X, and the rest all offer the ability to deliver a charge to a slope remotely. The key idea with explosives is the right charge at the right place at the right time. If the charge is too small or delivered to a spot that does not trigger an avalanche, then there is no effective mitigation. This is again why the institutional knowledge at the resorts is so important. The people doing the mitigation know where the sensitive spots are on the slope so they can place the charge effectively to trigger a release. Let's look at some of these explosive options in more detail. The howitzer shown on the left is an old style of delivering a charge that is slowly being phased out. This is what Mount Hood Meadows currently uses to bomb the bulls above Heather Canyon. The howitzer has the advantage that it does not expose the patrollers to avalanche risk. However, there is the danger of misfires or duds. The picture on the right shows a hand charge. These are used by both Ski Bowl and Mount Hood Meadows. They come in several sizes depending on the need. These are inexpensive and easy to use, but they expose the patrollers to both AVI risk and risk from injury if the explosive is mishandled. Here are two more active mitigation structures. The picture on the left is a Gaz-X device, which generates a shock wave using an oxygen propane jet. The force from the gas jet is intended to trigger a release. The advantage of these devices are that they can be operated remotely, so they do not expose patrollers to explosive or avalanche risk. The disadvantage is that they are fixed in place, so you do not have the flexibility to aim the explosive charge at arbitrary points on the slope. The device on the right is an avalauncher that fires a projectile using compressed gas. This device also does not subject the patrollers to AVI risk and does not have the explosive risks associated with artillery. Here are two more delivery methods. The image on the left shows a tram-based explosive delivery. This does not expose the patroller to AVI risk and does provide a limited amount of placement flexibility. However, duds and misfires can be much more complicated to retrieve with this device. The image on the right shows the Daisy Bell, a helicopter-based delivery system. This system can deliver charges anywhere on the slope, but there is some risk because the helicopter operations are involved, and mitigation activity requires good weather. Let's look at the mitigation techniques used on the resorts on Mount Hood where we patrol. Mount Hood Meadows has a very well-developed mitigation plan that includes the howitzer and the hand charges. These explosives are handled by the paid patrol staff who have gone through special training on explosives. Ski cutting is also used, primarily on the areas of the private reserve. Ski Bowl uses hand charges handled by the paid staff and ski cutting. Volunteers with the appropriate training are sometimes asked to help with ski cutting. Timberline makes limited use of ski cutting along Mile Canyon to release any cornices that developed. This figure shows a shot bowl for ski map. This is a shot map for Ski Bowl. The red X marks where the hand charges are placed to trigger a release. The map was developed based on the avalanche history of this terrain. Any use of explosives has the risk of misfires or duds. Each resort that uses explosives has a formal, documented protocol on how to handle misfires. The round that is misfired must be retrieved. It would not be good for a customer to come across unexploded ordnances on a ski run. Most resorts employ a 30-minute rule. If a round does not explode, the patrollers will wait 30 minutes before taking further action. This action could involve retrieving the round for evaluation as to why it did not explode. This is quite dangerous since it subjects the patroller to both avalanche risk and the risk of unexploded ordnance. Another option is for the patrollers to place another round next to the first round and try to detonate both. If for some reason the unexploded ordnance cannot be located, the location is noted and a more detailed search will occur when the snow has melted. One topic that comes up each year is something called post-mitigation release. These are avalanches that occur after the resort has done avalanche mitigation. Note this is very rare and is usually due to deep, persistent weak layers. Snow immersion issues are much more common and kill more people every year than post-mitigation release. This brings us to the end of our module on hazard mitigation. Thank you for listening.